Okay. Well, yeah, marketing, I think, had a few slip-ups on getting today totally organised with everyone. But anyway, anyone who hasn't attended will, as usual, watch it if they so desire. Look, today we don't, Paul's in here, but he doesn't have a lot to show in terms of new stuff. He's been on holidays and all the rest of it. So given that we went on holidays a couple of days after the previous one and all the team is only just back a week or so back, it's really only been a week or so of work, which is probably similar to most everyone in the room here. So we won't go through too much on the fleet app technology side. But what I will do is I'll just talk perhaps a little bit. And again, if no one's interested, they can drop out or they can, we can have a quick little discussion. I was going to have a quick little discussion on our next technology upgrade, which, I know Bundaberg knows of it more from their work side in terms of what's coming. And that's the technology base. And it's been nearly 2 years now or more actually working on a major technology upgrade. Which is what we would term the Angular upgrade, which is the technology that we're upgrading, which is the base level technology. I will just touch on the risk assessment a bit. Paul has done some work on that. And I don't know whether he wants to discuss a little bit more, but I just spoke to Lockie at Sea West Water, who, has a lot of experience in the risk space. And I know, Marie, you've got certainly some thoughts around that. So what we're going to try and do is perhaps create a little bit of a working group or what have you that can actually really focus in on it. And Lockie said he's going to get one of his guys, who is very proficient in risk and actually almost full-time risk manager within Greater Western Water, which I think will be a great resource to try and contribute from a general legislative / industry risk, whereas if we can get some of the fleet guys coming from the fleet perspective, and hopefully we can join something in the middle and do something. Paul, as I said, has done some work and played with it and taken some of the ideas that we were talking about and gone through. So we do have sort of something to start with, and we did have we've got the checklists and we've got all sorts of things, and so I think it's just a matter of going to be trying to assemble it all together to something that makes sense from a user point of view and that works. The other thing that is coming up is the IPWEA Conference from the fleet perspective, and I'd certainly like to understand, is anyone in the room going? I know that Bundy usually sends a couple of people, but is anyone else both aware of it and going to it, which is in, obviously in these strange times, it probably poses an extra barrier, but there is a conference, the IPWEA Conference on the 28th of March up in Brisbane. Is anyone in this room going to that?
Not that we're aware of Bundy necessarily.
No. No. Okay.
I'm trying to get there.
So who was that? Sorry.
I'm trying to get there. I'm organising to get there. Hopefully.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, look, we'll probably send something out, whether we have any sort of internal meetups or what have you. We're not quite sure. This will be the sort of first year. I'm certainly going to be there. We're doing a presentation, which we're trying to work through at the moment. So, yeah, look, just curious if anyone is going to be there. Obviously, we'll try and connect in either a casual or formal way, whatever you like. But yeah, just was more interested in terms of what people's plans were and, whether people saw the benefits in it and any sort of feedback on why they are or why they aren't going, but anyway, we can talk about that over the time. I'll just quickly hand over to Paul. I think Paul's got a little bit of housekeeping that he wants to run through in terms of the site and what's going on a little bit. So Paul, do you want to take that?
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody.
Sorry, Paul Hosking.
Paul Hosking. Oh, not Paul Health. What's your housekeeping, Paul?
I've got no housekeeping.
I'm a housekeeper. All right.
Well, you clean then, Paul.
Okay. Okay. So housekeeping today. Again, we did have a problem with the invites, it looks like, but that's all right. Now, I do have a question for the invites, about the invites. How do people get their invites? So we send out two. We send out a sort of graphic HTML email that has last month's recording on it and, you know, a bit of detail about what we're doing. And then we send out an invite, which is more of a calendar invite. Which one are people actually using? Can I ask, say, Duncan?
Calendar. Yeah, calendar.
The calendar invite. What about you, Paul Miller?
Yeah, the one I received off Matt was the calendar invite.
Okay, that's 2. Anybody else just want to say? Okay, that's 2. And if anyone wants to say they read the HTML, then they put up their hands now. Oh, okay. Oh, well, Ben, thank you. Right at the back there. All right. Well, look, we'll still send out the HTMLs, but it'll just be a little bit of a cut down version, and it'll just include the recordings because that's the main thing. It's just announcing the recordings. So again, I've got Grant turning up. Sorry, I'm now the admin or something. Okay. Oh, look, there's people chatting to me. That's excellent as well. Okay, calendar, email. Okay, there's 50. All right. So we had a problem. It looks like we've sort of recovered from it. Now I'm just going to quickly share screen. Just again, this is just a reminder. We're still getting people coming in randomly. So you can see my screen now. So people, if you want to get onto the mailing list, which is going to fire up this year, I'm going to tell you. You go to our website, formbird.com, and then go to the Formbird Fleet Professionals. It's a complete redesign. It's just an incredible visual feast here. If you want to register, this will just put you on the mailing list and you'll get your invites via HTML and via calendar. And we put the next week's or next month's invite there if you need it. But also the join the discussion group button, which will take you to your email. Short of doing that, you just have to send an email to fleet@Formbird and you will be part of the discussion group. And that's enough from me. And that was housekeeping with Paul. Back to you, Mark.
All right. Other than going into Angular, more fleet sort of stuff, I suppose something that we would like to know and start getting a little bit more feedback is on some of the developments you'd like to see kind of this year. I was terming it our New Year's resolution. You know, obviously risk seems to, you know, evolved as a hot topic at the end of the year. Again, we don't want to have it down to the minutiae, but perhaps a couple of sort of high level things that you guys feel that we have a gap. You know, it's never assumed that we know what you guys want and we're missing. We're trying to formalize that kind of approach of reviewing what people are putting in the queue or asking for or what have you. One of the sort of challenges, of course, is when it's you know, sort of a conflicting requirements between people in terms of, you know, one person really wants something and it doesn't appear to be of general agreement with the rest of the group. We'll have to just sort of work through that conflict, particularly since we're trying to keep a lot of the app as a sort of single app. We now have the ability to add those extra work orders and a whole lot of other stuff. As you know, it's very configurable in that sense. But there are some sort of core functions, if you like, within the app that we just can't sort of mess up that process, because otherwise we're going to mess up the data sets that some of those processes rely on. So there's sort of stuff we can at the outside peripherally change and work on. And then there's the core stuff in the middle. So I suppose in terms of as an organization, from Formbird's point of view, this rolls into the Angular discussion. And again, please, I'll try and sort of just explain what it's about, just so that you've got a bit of a heads up on what's going on. So our current technology, which is what most of you guys are running in terms of, or you're all running on Fleet app, is what we term version 3. So our next release will be version 4. The version 3 that you're running the Fleet app on is is actually a hybrid of technologies. So when the sort of browser sort of made a big leap about 10, 15 years ago, and really everyone started adopting the browser as almost like a desktop application, if you like, or an operating system. What was termed JavaScript frameworks were built into, or started to be built. Google was a leader in that space, and that's why you end up with Google Docs and all these Google apps that were very much very interactive and more like a desktop app than the previous. I don't know, some of us with very little hair and a lot of grey hair would remember that the old websites were very just paint and draw, and not really a lot of interaction, no drag and drop, no images sort of popping up and all the rest to it. So when Google wanted to, I suppose, publish more information, richer information, they started to really focus on these, what we would term a framework. So it's sort of a set of code that runs in the browser, which then people can leverage, which then allows developers like us to develop rich applications more rapidly and more easily. So it was in their benefit to, I suppose, to leverage that. They developed this framework, this original framework, which was called Angular. For whatever reason, it was called Angular. It was called Angular. It's now termed Angular JS, which is the old version. So what then happened was a whole lot of sort of major competitors, including Facebook, not really competitors, they released that as an open source product. So everyone had access, including ourselves, to all aspects of it. Facebook also had the same objective, was to really provide a rich interface. And it's also so they've developed what's called the React framework. And their framework is very much around the client side, and a lot of people have adopted in terms of client capability. So you'll see that the richness of a Facebook app is being driven heavily by the React framework. So anyway, winding ourselves back, when we started Formbird, the technology, if you like, it was 2014, 15 when we started sort of first cutting code, if you like. And the only available true framework was Angular, and which later called Angular JS. So Angular JS was what was available. We developed the app and released basically a full Angular JS app in 2016, 17 as our very first release. Since then, really, all these other frameworks came around. They all looked at the Angular framework as the first generation. And then what happened was essentially all the developers figured out that there was a whole lot of deficiencies in it, and there's a whole lot of better ways of doing it. And so they released the version 2 of Angular, which in fact became Angular over Angular JS, and it was totally different. And when we got confronted with that back in 2017, we actually were so different that we actually started looking at other frameworks, because we knew the amount of effort to go to Angular was going to be just as much as going to almost another framework. So it kind of opened up. In one hand, it made our decision, really made our decision very hard, because it meant that we really had to look inside and really consider what our next move was. After about 6 months of R&D with sort of 2 or 3 of our head engineers, looking at the technologies and playing with them and going down a few blind alleys and having to sort of back out and throw a whole lot of stuff away, we actually decided then to go to Angular. And there was a number of reasons for that. Number one was Google had actually realized that there's a whole lot of people in our boat. And so they actually made it easier to migrate. So they actually developed a whole lot of stuff that sort of helped us migrate. So what we actually ended up with in our next generation, which is what we're releasing now, which is kind of our version 4, is a pure Angular version, but also we've actually stripped out. And what happened also is a whole lot of specialist sort of components have arrived on the scene, which are not Angular, but are just other frameworky elements. So what we've done now is our the Angular release, which is probably false being called Angular, but it's the main thing is that it actually consists of Angular, but a whole lot of other independent elements that we can sort of chop and change a lot more, to the point where, in fact, our front end now can support other libraries. So whether it be React, Angular, or any of those others, which gives us a lot of freedom to incorporate good UI elements off the web. So if there's something fancy that the React guys, because React is very strong on the UI, we can very easily incorporate that into our applications now in the components. So if there's a nice new calendar or a nice new editor or a nice new drag and drop something or other, it makes it very easy for us to pick between the technology. So it's given us a lot more front end technology independence. It also, at that stage when we first developed it, sort of why we called our components, it has standardized and a far more rugged construct now around what a component is defined as, which again means that we can far easier grab a React component and turn it into a Formbird component, or an Angular component and turn it into a component. So all of those sort of things coming together. So where are we at today, and what's sort of the release time frame? So I can sort of pull up and just show you our kind of initial target app, which is actually Greater Western Water, and I'll just give you a feel for what it is in sort of real terms, just forgetting about all the technology bullshit. So let me just share my screen, which will just give you, again, a feel for what's going on, and I hope that you guys can sort of see it. I'll just move all that over. Can people see this, my screen? Is it sort of semi-readable?
Yep, all good.
All good? Okay, so so our initial target app is the Greater Western Water app, and this is sitting under Angular. So the move from any of our apps between the technologies, there is some work. We have to run a bunch of scripts. We have to do some patching in the apps and what have you. So it's not, we haven't been able to get it sort of totally just flick and switch. But we've essentially redeveloped all the components, and so it's, I suppose, one of the key capabilities, in fact, that we believe we can offer our customer base, is that you can move with the technology independent of the application. And so that separation of application and core technology does mean that you can stay up to date with the technology, but your business functions don't change. It's a really important thing to say, well, this is my application, but my core technology is up to date and not gone out of date, because in fact, AngularJS is going out of support by the end of this year, from Google. Not that it matters a lot. You'll have a hell of a lot of technology that you're currently running in your organizations that are no longer supported by the core suppliers. But it's not a good thing necessarily over the long term, particularly, when you look in security and all these other things, but, it becomes almost unavoidable. But that's really one of our key objectives, was to make sure that our technology that your applications are built on, up to date and supported and what have you. So the big things that really come with it is, like I said, there's that all the sort of, A, it's up to date. B, we can support new components a lot easier and do a lot more stuff. C, performance-wise, there was a lot of work done to improve performance in terms of the components and the way they get built and the way they get assembled. So this is, it's our water app, which probably Michelle's the only person that crosses over into the two environments. But it'll give you a feel for a fairly complex app, the sort of performance we're getting. So, this is this is one of our heavier apps in terms of performance and speed. But it does a whole lot of stuff in terms of load times, in terms of just the way it'll interact, with the environment. So I've got it actually going here on a tablet. So this is actually running on a Samsung tablet. One of the nice features with the Angular environment is that you can actually install it as a app, as opposed to install it as kind of a web link. So this is the fleet installed, if you like, into which is this unit, this app here. So that's it really is just basically hides the browser function. So it comes up and looks like an app, and certainly does look like an app from a user's perspective. But in fact, what it does is it's kind of running it in the browser and hides the browser capability. whereas it's a little bit different in the actual Angular. It actually downloads and installs and caches the data than the application more locally. So what we find is that the overall performance is really quite good. Let me just do the same thing. So, this is just running on the lower version of the Samsung S7. So this is the FE, which is not their high performance one. So this is got the 5G and slightly more memory, but it's not. It was $1,000 tablet rather than a $1,500 tablet or anything. If I click on any of the links.
Mark, can I just ask a question?
Yep.
With this, is there any idea where you're at in the offline mode?
Yes. So the offline is being tested at the moment, and that's a really actually question. So we've actually we're just kicking off a project with Ricardo. I don't know whether anyone knows Ricardo. They're a big engineering design consulting. So you've got KPMG and those guys which are on the financial side. Ricardo is a big engineering consulting firm. Now, what's relevant about them is that they're actually doing a survey of the rail network in Saudi Arabia, of all places. But what's interesting is that their entire app, which is going to be relatively small, is going to be operating offline. So we've been working on running that. So rather than worrying about a whole big app and part of it going offline and not offline, we're actually kicking off that project. I've got the kickoff meeting this afternoon. We've had the guys making sure over the last 5 months, that the Angular version is still supporting what we could do offline. But the problem has been we just haven't implemented anyone in a really live sense offline. So what we're going to do, and that's what, and a very good question, is use this opportunity to kind of have a very simple app fully offline, which then we can sort of essentially bug test the more complex apps like you guys have got to then implement offline. So yeah, so that's kind of absolutely in train right now. So I'm hoping that project is sort of a 3 to 6 month project. And their first sort of offline app is going to be in about the next 6-8 weeks. And we're pretty confident that we're ready to go with the Angular version. So it'll be the Angular version offline. And then what we'll do is we'll reapply any learnings from that back to, the more complex apps as we upgrade the app. So it'll go then in line that the fleet app, for instance, will be, one of the apps that gets upgraded. Our plan at the moment is GWW, this version here, is going to be, go live there. They hope to go into UAT probably in about 4 to 6 weeks, and then go live in 2 or 3 weeks after that. So then we'll, that'll give us a full Angular version all out in production. We'll be able to start to look at then moving across other apps, particularly the fleet app, and then we'll have, coordinated with the offline. So it's one of our New Year's resolution is to really get the offline going, and particularly in apps like Fleet. Is that clear as mud? Yeah. So I suppose just firstly, I'll throw it out there so that, any questions along this, I hope it hasn't sort of confused people or, or anything else. I hope that it's of interest. Michelle, Duncan, anyone want to?
No, that's looking good. Looking forward to the offline version when you've gone down that path.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so much easier for those remote areas, and it's rendering really well.
Yeah. Look, I was really impressed with. I sort of picked up this tablet only a week ago or so, and once I installed the Angular version and what have you, it's like I said, this is probably one of our heaviest forms. It's probably the equivalent of the Fleet asset form with GI. You know, its weighting is the GIS is you know, it obviously takes a bit of rendering. So, you know, and it's you know, quite acceptable going between them. So I can really sort of navigate, and you know, it's got a sort of 5-6 seconds render or even less before it starts rendering. So it feels sorry.
A quick question. So for the GIS rendering, of course, because it's graphics going to take more, and you sort of said similar to the asset info. So when we are uploading, sometimes with what, 30, 40 photos that we upload against the asset, and of course, when you open up that asset, it is quite slow.
Yes.
When we move to Angular, will that also speed up the fact of those loading of those images?
No, look,
they are thumbnail, you know, but still.
Yeah. Look, we probably need to look at what we do with that resolutions and making sure people are taking the problem with the images is actually the resolution for which you're taking the photo at and then downloading it and pulling it back again. We probably need to, at the moment we just do whatever someone wants in terms of what we pull back. We probably need to keep duplicate or a thumbnail version, like you said. At the moment, it's actually pulling back the full version, whatever resolution it is, in order to create the thumbnail, which makes it nice and fast when you click on it, but makes it slow when it first renders. So it's probably something we need to look at in terms of separating a thumbnail and only loading a thumbnail, only load the large one when we actually dive into it. At the moment, it's loading whatever resolution you've loaded and specified, unless you've turned the compression on, unless we've turned the compression on a particular item. I don't know, I think we discussed that at one point. We actually decided to turn it back off again because people wanted high resolution at some time and not high, you know what I mean? So we've kind of left it back into the hand of the user, which is really then up to the camera setting to determine the actual resolution that gets stored. And so it'll store whatever the camera is. So if you've got a tablet or phone that's taking insanely large photos, well, that's what you're going to get. It's going to obviously make sure it's whatever JPEG or whatever that the camera is giving me, but it'll do that. So when it does load it at the moment, it does load all images down, which is just a bandwidth issue, not a Angular issue. It's just simply the time it takes to pull 200 megabytes or 100 megabytes off the internet.
We have set, all of our tablets are set to the compressed version of those images and video, so they are always going to be compressed.
Yeah.
And I suppose it comes down to is because we have to, and that's the trouble we came across. The image that we're taking of something compressed, or if someone is not setting that compression rate, is yes, the thumbnail could be less clear, but yeah, when you click into it, we do need to see detail because we're taking things like tags, which are stamped, so you need to see that. Invoices, which now we can't recover any of that data because it's so pixelated you can't actually read it.
Yeah.
So things like that is really imperative for our financial information. So yeah, that's something I'm happy, again, not just us, but others in part of this conversation on what do we actually need.
Yes.
From your perspective, from a software perspective.
Yep. Yeah, cool. Yeah, any other questions or comments or thoughts? Either I've confused everyone or I was clear as mud, clear as whatever. Anyway, okay, I'll move off Angular, but that's kind of, as I said, you can sort of see that it's not totally there. You on a quick demo like that, you won't see the bugs, but it's sort of down to probably, I think Grant's got it down to about 6, what we would consider major bugs for this specific customer. And then there's about 15, 20 minors. It's always a little bit moving because as soon as you clean up a big one, something may become minor or what have you, but it's getting really close. It's getting close. So in fact, all of the development for GWW has now moved to this new environment. So there's a lot of confidence about what that environment represents and that it'll be part of that next release. I'll stop the sharing for the moment unless there's anything else we need to cover off. Let me just have a look. I think we're probably there's been a fair bit of work on the GEOTAB integration, and we sort of see that's a bit of a New Year's resolution for us. So working on, I suppose, providing a more integrated solution that kind of, something that I hope to get feedback from you guys, is how can we make the system more hidden, if you like. So it's kind of just part of operations, and we minimize the amount of effort you need to be putting in to running a solution. The more silent an application can be in your operations, the better it is. So that's something we'd like to sort of explore as much as we can ongoing, as we always have. But how can we kind of get less for more, if you like, in the sense that the interactions that a user has with it is absolutely critical, but we automate as much as possible in one form or another, whether it be the automation of various processes and perhaps it's notifications to users about upcoming services, or sort of sharing the load so that there's the better and improved communications. So there's sort of areas that we would certainly like to keep growing through the year. And, if people have got any ideas there that can simplify the world. Grant was talking about a little one he's just done for Greater Western Water. Again, not totally relevant certainly not relevant in terms of the actual function, but making a huge difference, within a couple of hours. At the moment, Greater Western Water uses the application for confined space entry management in the water industry. So, when you go into a sewer, you have to do a confined space entry. Historically, they've always done it that they have to call phone back in when they exit, so that it becomes they close out the confined space entry and they make sure alarms don't go off and people aren't going to try and find people down the end of holes. And, we now send, or he sort of prototyped up a very simple application that sort of shoots out an SMS and email or whatever to the user. They click on one button and they say, yes, I've exited. Sort of almost no effort, but it apparently they do, and Grant can qualify sort of 1,600 or 1,800 phone calls a month at the moment just on that. So it can be quite significant resource load, and within a couple of hours of putting a prototype together, they're now running around demonstrating, whether they can put this change through and really leverage that simple function. So really, really looking for, perhaps some of those ideas that we can, minimize the amount of traffic, improve the data collection, minimize the interactions that are just waste time. So any of those are very interesting to us, and we would love to explore. I think that we're going to be, I probably will cut it fairly short today. Is there anything that anyone wants, or we should, we'll obviously have more on application builds and stuff as we move, further down, and we have a few more days between meetings. This is obviously a fairly short between days in terms of effort. So there's not much on, or there's nothing on the application side, but happy to be guided also about what we do with, we look at in future meetings. So I'll kind of hand it over to the audience, and then we'll, I suppose, wrap it up.
Mark, I've got something.
Yep.
So in terms of usability, as you expand the number of sites, obviously the nuances will be different between each site, and we have to understand that we need to keep it as generic as possible. But what makes a difference in a user's day is being able to do things by bulk, and importantly, maybe have, like what Paul did with sticky filters and things like that, have the user to be able to set things up for them as opposed to another user, and also site level specific types of settings. Mm-hmm. So Paul's not having to try and, rather than try and be pulled this way and this one wants here and pulled that way, someone else wants there, but write something generic where the site or user can set something, mm-hmm. and then that sticks for that setting. I know that's not necessarily simple. It takes obviously a lot more thought to make that generic, but that would solve the user level where you're going into something and it's not that it might save you an hour. It's it saves you 5 to 6 seconds, but you're doing it 100 times a day.
Yep.
So having to keep resetting a filter when you reload something, or that's what becomes frustrating to the user when you go, but I've just been in here. Now I have to reload it. Now I have to reset all my filters.
Yep. So keep going down that path of which obviously we've started on. We've got the unique work orders. We've got the user specific filters. They're the ones that are giving you best return.
Yeah, it's sometimes the smallest things that returns a really good time investment for the end user.
Yep. No, understand. Cool. Marie, anyone else there out in the ether? Oh, good. Oh, well, Paul Arkell, is there anything that you wanted to just quickly chip in that's come to mind?
Not real. I've only really just got back last kind of week. One thing I did do over the holidays was to create, the last meeting we had was about risk assessment. And from that meeting, I took that we needed some way to have like a definable risk matrix.
Yep.
So I built a component to do that.
Is it demonstratable at all? Did you want to quickly flick that up?
Yeah, can do.
See, he said he wasn't going to demonstrate something, but
so I've taken share. Are you looking at a WO 1469 risk assessment now?
Yep.
Cool. So I took the process that we developed for Bundaberg in their water application in terms of identifying the risk and then creating control documents from those risks being identified. So this is a risk assessment work order with a set of definable questions. Those questions are all defined against the asset. So the asset drives what appears in here. And that can be from a group level or from an individual asset or a combination of both. And this checklist will present that information that's been defined against the asset. If there's a yes here, that would indicate that there's some sort of risk being identified and that there'll be a risk control document created for that. So the button does that creation. And the risk control document inherits the information off the from the selection. So it'll inherit these pieces of information plus the linkages back to the original work order. But this is the component which is definable that are developed over holidays. It's definable by a JSON object like this, which we can set up. And so, from the process that was set up for Bundaberg was basically the identify the potential injury and give it a risk rating, and then identify the control measure and give it another risk rating, and that sort of gets saved to the document as these ratings. So yeah, that was a couple of days in the holidays which I did that. The definitions for these have risk assessment questions, which are work in a similar way to the daily driver check questions, and they're defined against either the asset.
So, Paul, just on that risk matrix, perhaps just go back to it and just sort of explain a little bit on how it works in terms of, if you've got the definition of it.
Yeah. So the definition is.
Go back to the user. What someone does as a user, not so much the definition. So I'm just trying to just so that people better understand the use of it.
Yep, sure. So if if you check one of these and it hasn't already been generated, that indicates that there's a risk. And a risk control document can be generated for that, which is that one that was just generated. And the process then would be to then fill out the relevant information to control that risk. And that's all linked back to the asset and the work order. And it also records the primary meter and the date that this was created. So you can sort of identify that the asset had travelled X amount, and on this date we controlled a risk that we identified. So that's kind of where I got to. Looking forward to sort of feedback from Lockie and others about whether that's an appropriate way to go. I'm kind of clutching at straws a little bit at the moment, but in any case, we've got this component which seems to be sort of like an integral part of identifying a risk. It always seems to be a risk matrix, so the component can be reused in other places. And whether this process is ticks the boxes or not, I'll get some feedback. I'll keep working on it.
Hey, Paul, that's looking good. And I think, wasn't there a working party sort of set up for people who wanted to join the conversation about the risk assessment?
Yeah, there kind of was, but we probably haven't formally met, and we need to actually, I wanted to get a couple of people that, this is where Lockie chimed in last time, and he was going to talk to Hugh, and he hasn't been, holidays and that, hasn't been able to nail back. He couldn't make it today due to all sorts of things happening in both his life, professionally and personally. So he's committed to have a meeting, and that was one of the questions, I suppose, today is who would like to join that and chip in. I'd really like to see anyone who's had any experience on the risk side for fleet get involved, because any of the nuances, or anyone, I know Marie, you've had quite a bit of experience of some of this, so certainly I'd love you to put up your hand to at least to come along. Fantastic. We'll include you in the invite. And again, we'll run them something like a Zoom meeting like this, so there's no sort of limited numbers. Someone can come in and watch the whole thing and only chime in when they've got something relevant, or they just want to watch or whatever. So it's not an exclusive club. It's more just don't want to bore have a meeting and bore the shit out of everyone who's going to turn up. So, Michelle, did you want to join, or Donnie?
I personally don't need to, but people like Don and others most certainly, I think, should be part of the conversation. So that, Paul, when you're doing stuff, you are getting info from Lockie, from Fleet, so that you can collectively put something together, because hate for you to go down a path and works for one, and then we go, no, that doesn't work for us. And then
no, absolutely. And that's what we want to avoid, because it's just...
But certainly some guys, if you send out the meeting invite, then the relevant parties, I think, yes, you have a specific risk assessment meeting with Paul, and, you work through those processes, essentially. Yeah,
awesome.
Adam will be taking more of the design lead from this year, so we'll get him involved.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, that's good. So look, Lockie's committed to send out sort of some times, which I'm hoping either be late or sometime next week or the week after, sort of thing. What we'll do is we'll send out an invite and a time, and look, obviously if there's a few people, like Donnie and Marie and that, we'll make sure that you are there. So we'll keep moving times to get at least 3 or 4 of us, not 20 of us have to be, but the people that are willing to commit, and really give operational feedback to it. And then we'll just send out a more general email where people can just drop in if they've got the time to watch, or they've got the interest. Does that sound acceptable? I assume silence is good.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, guys. Well, we've nearly gone and filled up the hour, and I thought today might have been a 15-minute one, but anyway, we somehow find a way to fill the hour. So we'll organise that next week. we'll set another date for 4 to 6 weeks for the next one, and always just chime in, give us feedback, give us information, whatever. Otherwise, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. Keep on keeping on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, mate.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Thanks, guys.
Well,
Get the invites.